There's a kind of silence that doesn't feel empty. It feels intentional. Like someone pressed pause, not because they lost interest, but because they were waiting. For years after Lisa Marie Kimmell's body was found, that's exactly what investigators were left with. Silence. No car, no suspect, no arrest, just dead ends, cold trails, and questions that echoed louder than any answer they got. This episode, we're stepping into that silence. The years that followed Lisa's murder weren't quiet for lack of effort. They were loud with frustration, with grief, with leads that collapsed, tips that went nowhere, and families that kept calling long after the world had stopped listening. We'll hear from Lisa's relatives, how they lived with not knowing, how birthdays, holidays, even everyday routines became reminders of what was stolen. We'll also speak with law enforcement, some who were there from the beginning, some who picked up the cold files in later years. And we'll talk about the broader truth that was harder to swallow. Lisa wasn't alone. Throughout the late 80s and early 90s, women kept disappearing across Wyoming, Colorado, and Montana. Not all of them were found. Not all of them were connected, but some were close enough to keep people up at night. And then came a letter, a strange, cryptic message signed only with the name Stringfellow Hawke. It wasn't evidence. It wasn't a confession, but it was something. And in the silence that followed Lisa's death, anything felt like a lead. That is the stretch of time where grief hardened into resolve, where families stopped asking for answers and started demanding them. Hey, Angela, how's it going?
It's going well. How are you?
I'm great. Yeah, I'm doing really good. I mean, trying to maintain some semblance of a schedule that makes sense, but it is what it is. So we ready to jump into this part of Lisa's story?
Let's talk about this part of Lisa's story. How about that?
Perfect. You know, what's worse than losing someone suddenly? It's losing them slowly, one unanswered call at a time, one failed lead after another, and knowing that somewhere out there, someone is walking free.
The years after Lisa's murder were brutal. Not just because of what happened to her, but because of what didn't happen afterwards. No arrest, no trial, no answers.
Her case went cold, and in that silence, fear took root. Not just in Cody, not just in Denver, but across this entire region.
Because women were disappearing from highways, from small towns, from places just like where Lisa was last seen.
This is Dark Dialogue Rocky Mountain Reckoning, the series where we return to the crimes rooted deep in the dirt and snow of the American West, the ones that never left the hearts of the people who lived through them.
We investigate the stories buried under snowfall, prairie dust, and decades of unanswered questions. The ones whispered through cattle fences, past broken barbed wire, and across wind-lashed highways.
Disappearance isn't always about getting lost. Sometimes someone is waiting.
I'm Angela.
And I'm John.
And in this episode, we walk through the years after Lisa's body was found. The stalled investigations, the strain on her family, and the strange letter that reopened old wounds.
This is A Cold Silence.
And this is Dark Dialogue, Rocky Mountain Reckoning.
A cold case doesn't freeze overnight. It slows, one call at a time, one file at a time, until what was once urgent becomes just another folder on the shelf. That's what happened with Lisa's case. After the autopsy, after the press, after the river gave her back, nothing gave her back justice. Leads came in. A possible sighting in Utah, a man arrested in Montana, a tip about a black CRX in Colorado. All of them dead ends. There were stumbles too, information that wasn't shared between agencies, names that were dismissed too early, a vehicle description that never quite reached the right desk at the right time. And each year that passed without movement, it hurt. Not just Lisa's family, but the officers who still carried her case like a weight in their pockets. Lisa had been found, but her killer? He was still out there, and the trail was going colder by the season. All right, so we're talking about this period of time between 1988 and 2002. So beyond when Lisa was kidnapped, held, murdered, her body found, and then years later in 2002 when we finally get some breaks in this case. So talking about the investigative efforts early on in 1988, police launched a nationwide hunt for Lisa's distinct black Honda CRX with the Little Miss license plates.
Right.
Despite hundreds of reported sightings, some as far away as Canada, the car was never located. Lisa's father personally rented a plane to search Wyoming highways.
Wow.
Nothing was found. Eyewitness accounts conflicted. Sightings placed Lisa alive after investigators believed that she was already dead. So March 26th, the sheriff's wife in Buffalo, Wyoming, saw a blonde in a pink sweater driving Lisa's car. March 27th, a woman in Casper saw the car again, but the driver now wore a yellow sweater. And then again on March 27th, a Buffalo gas station attendant saw a blonde with a man in Lisa's car.
What color sweater?
That one, we don't know the sweater. But these reports were definitely...
Felt a theme there for a minute.
Yeah, there seemed to be a theme. So Lisa's family didn't recall her owning a pink or a yellow sweater, and she had last been seen in black and white when stopped for speeding. Investigators were unable to reconcile why Lisa, if she was still alive, didn't ask for help. And by the late 1980s, investigators lost faith in pretty much all eyewitness reports. And then in October of 1988, a strange note signed Stringfellow Hawke was found on her gravestone, and authorities couldn't link it to any suspect.
Yeah, that's weird.
So in March of 1989, Unsolved Mysteries aired a segment on the case, generating thousands of calls, but tips about lookalike cars and rumors led nowhere, overwhelming the small Natrona County Sheriff's Office. So, but in talking about this weird-ass note, so a few months after Lisa Marie Kimmell was buried, a mysterious note was found taped to her gravestone, and that was found on October 13th of 1988. The discovery was made by a family friend who was visiting her grave, saw the note, and quickly alerted Lisa's father, Ron, who then went and recovered it. The letter was sealed in an envelope, and it was signed Stringfellow Hawke, which was a reference to the 1980s TV show Airwolf, which, do you remember that show?
No.
I was a huge fan. Airwolf was like this really freaking badass helicopter. And the main character of Airwolf actually died. I can't remember how he died. I don't remember if it was suicide or if it was like an accidental hanging. I almost think that it kind of was an accidental thing, but I just don't remember. But it was a huge show for a little while in the 80s.
Well, remember, as we discussed, I spent most of my time watching MASH with my dad.
This is true.
So,
Yep.
ask me about MASH. I can answer all of it.
So the letter reads as follows. Lisa, there aren't words to say how much you're missed. The pain never leaves. It's so hard without you. You'll always be alive in me. Your death is my painful loss, but heaven's sweet gain. Love always, Stringfellow Hawke. So the author's use of the unusual TV character name and the lack of context led authorities and the Kimmell family to view the note as both creepy and baffling.
I agree.
Neither Lisa's family nor friends recognized the handwriting or the signature.
It's not the boyfriend?
It absolutely was not the boyfriend.
Okay.
But we know who it was. At this point, we know that it was Delwayne Eaton.
Oh, shit. I forgot.
Yeah. But at this period of time in 1988, we have no clue. So at the time, authorities could not determine who left the note or whether it was connected to her killer. The note became a point of speculation in the unsolved case, and they discussed it on Unsolved Mysteries.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, later we would learn. So after Delwayne Eaton was identified as Lisa's murderer, a handwriting expert matched his handwriting to the note.
Okay.
And the reason that Eaton used the Stringfellow Hawke alias remains an absolute mystery. We have no clue. Some true crime writers have speculated that Eaton identified with the character's reclusive qualities, but there's no confirmed explanation, and this piece of shit is never said, so we don't know. The note is retrospectively seen as an indicator of Eaton's psychological state and possible desire to revisit the crime or to taunt investigators and the family.
Is he acknowledged that he wrote it?
No.
Okay.
This piece of shit doesn't acknowledge anything.
Got it.
But the cryptic letter represented one of the most chilling and enigmatic elements of the Kimmell case for many years before Delwayne Eaton would be identified.
Okay.
I think that as weird and creepy and nasty and gross and whatever you want to say this is, I think that in kidnapping her and holding her hostage, he formed some weird attachment to her that he didn't have to other victims. This is not unusual. It has happened with other killers in other cases where one victim, it just becomes more important or whatever you want to say than the others.
Yeah.
But I think that that's what happened here. The weird part is, and you know, as I've said a million times, and I'll probably say a million more, the insane can never understand the sane.
Yeah.
But it's just so bizarre.
You mean that backwards.
The sane can never understand the insane. Is that not what I said?
No, you said the insane
backwards.
Yeah.
Well, it's probably both. Either.
It's probably both ways. Yeah.
You know, you would think like, oh, you know, I've kidnapped this woman and she's so much more beautiful or special or amazing than any of the rest. Maybe I won't kill her.
Mm-hmm.
But it never works that way.
Yeah.
It's so freaking strange.
Because they think, oh, maybe she'll love me, and then she doesn't, and so she must die.
Yeah, but then to be like, you know, wait, like in the letter, he writes, there aren't words to say how much you're missed. Well, she's missing because you killed her, you dumb son of a bitch.
Exactly.
And the pain never leaves. Again, you created the pain, dipshit. It's so hard without you. Okay? Again, you killed her, you dumb son of a bitch. Yeah. And you'll always be with me.
There's another personality in there. It's Jekyll and Hyde.
I guess.
Although it's probably Hyde and Hyde.
I was going to say, I don't think there's a lot of Jekyll.
It's probably Hyde and Hyde, but...
Your death is my painful loss, but heaven's sweet gain. Again, you did this. You freaking psychopath.
Yes.
And yeah, obviously he is, but it's just so creepy and gross and weird and bizarre and unexplainable that I don't know.
Yeah.
So that letter showed up really soon, actually, after her, you know, the discovery of her body and everything, which, if you remember, was in March. And then, you know, she was buried, and then by October, they're finding this letter. So it's not that long after. And it's just just another sick and twisted, weird angle of not only are you writing this cryptic, creepy ass weird note, but then you're also still like torturing her family with it.
Yeah.
It's just a sadism taken to the next level.
There's definitely control.
Yeah. And it's just creepy and weird. But so after that, in June of 1989, federal agent Don Flickinger joined to assist, staying on the case for 6 years. He chased lead after lead, including unreasonable or unreliable jailhouse informants, cult rumors, and false tipsters. And he played a central and tireless role in this long-running investigation into Lisa's murder, serving as the lead investigator from 1989 through his retirement in 1995. And this part is strange as shit to me, but he was an agent with the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, not to be confused with Brigadier General Don D. Flickinger, associated with aviation and space medicine, which, yes, which when you start researching these people and you come across, it's just like, really? And then you got to dig deeper, and then you're like, okay, so they're two completely different Don Flickingers. And, the fact that he was an ATF agent is curious as shit to me.
Yeah.
I researched it, and it just seemed like he was the most capable federal investigator in this area. And so for whatever reason, he was put on the case. It strikes me as odd, even for 1988, it didn't happen that I know of all that much. Typically, something like this would be handled by the FBI, not the ATF.
Yeah.
There is not an ATF angle at all to this case. They predominantly deal with alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, and now explosives because that's been added. But at this point, I don't know, but it happened. So, and he joined the case in June of 89 after Lisa's parents expressed a lot of frustration with the local investigation's slow progress. And then he stayed on the case for 6 years. So he conducted the first major suspect interview in July of 1989, traveling to Oregon to meet a jail inmate who claimed to have insider knowledge. And, we'll talk about that as we kind of work through this, but he was noted for personally tracking down suspects across state lines, including going to Alaska and to Texas and questioning a wide array of individuals, from jailhouse informants to purported cult members, suspects identified by polygraphy, out-of-state car owners, and even law enforcement officers. So Flickinger's dogged approach was recognized. Other investigators dubbed him as, quote, the vampire because of his practice of collecting large numbers of blood samples from suspects of interest. And that's so huge because this is at a time before DNA really became a thing. But this guy had the foresight to be like, I'm taking your blood, bitch. So,
I'm sure that's how it went down.
I think it probably was.
Yeah, has to be.
So he worked closely with the Natrona County Sheriff's Office, notably with investigator Dan Tholson, and together they formed a cooperative front despite interagency politics between local and federal leadership. He investigated every plausible lead and rumor, including those stemming from psychic visions and unsolved mysteries TV leads, but none would provide a breakthrough. So Flickinger was described by Lisa's mom as passionate about this case and tenacious. He would never give up, she said. His persistence was widely acknowledged, although he was ultimately unable to solve the case before he retired. And he basically hit the mandatory retirement age is what happened. It's not like he decided to retire. He had no choice.
Kind of was asked to, yeah.
Yeah, well, most law enforcement agencies have an age where you cannot carry a gun and be involved beyond this age, period. Once you hit that, you're out. And that's what happened with him. So, and he expressed deep disappointment for not being able to deliver answers to the Kimmell family, but he remained confident that DNA evidence would eventually solve this case. And true to his expectations, DNA advancements finally closed the case after his retirement. So, I couldn't find a lot of information about his personal background, such as when he was born or much about his family life, as his public notoriety is primarily linked to his work on Lisa's case. But his role in the Lisa Kimmell investigation is remembered for his relentless pursuit of leads and willingness to crisscross the country in the search for answers, even though the case would only break with new forensic technology years after his formal involvement. Like I said, he was an ATF agent and he participated in the investigation rather than FBI agents, primarily due to local law enforcement's request and pre-existing relationships. So after the murder investigation stalled, the Kimmell family sought additional resources and expertise to help the Natrona County Sheriff's Office, and him as an ATF agent based in Billings, Montana, was officially assigned to provide assistance as a federal investigator. And the case was not automatically an FBI case because it didn't fit with the typical criteria for jurisdiction. There was no kidnapping across state lines with ransom, acts of terrorism. You know, a lot of that stuff automatically becomes federal jurisdiction, but this didn't have that. So instead, the ATF had available personnel that were familiar with the region, and he was able to offer his investigative skills and support the local sheriff's office, filling that role that the state or local authorities might usually fill if they had more manpower. So the FBI still consulted with Flickinger, especially in areas where ritual or occult aspects were speculated. They gave advice regarding the pentagram-shaped wounds, which we'll be talking about, but they did not take over the primary federal investigative role. So a couple of notable investigative angles. I already mentioned this previously, but there was an inmate in an Oregon County jail serving time for a petty crime who reached out to Lisa Kimmell's parents in Billings and claimed that he had information about her murder. His motive was to secure a deal for himself, which tells me that this guy is an absolute piece of shit who I hope is still in prison and died there, or is going to die there, because if you would reach out to the family of a murder victim just to see what you can get out of it, you're an absolute piece of shit. So, but when he did that, Don Flickinger and the Natrona County investigator, Dan Folson, they were on a plane and they went to Portland. And in July of '89, it became Flickinger's first official interview on the case, and they spoke directly with the inmate, but quickly determined that he had absolutely no knowledge of the murder. The conversation lasted only about 20 minutes.
What a waste.
Yeah. And then they were like, okay, this piece of shit doesn't know anything. I'm tired of wasting my time. Let's get back on the plane and go back to Wyoming, because if it only takes 20 minutes, he really didn't know about shit. You know, and like I said, the evilness of involving a victim's family in your plot to get a couple years off your sentence or whatever.
Especially when you know nothing.
Yeah, he's just a piece of shit.
It's disgusting.
But that incident does exemplify a common challenge in a lot of high-profile criminal investigations.
Happens a lot.
You know, where inmates or informants will occasionally attempt to inject themselves into the case for personal gain rather than to provide any genuine help or anything. They just want to see what they can get out of it. And it happens, like you say, all the freaking time. And then the next theory is the quote unquote cult theory. So the FBI focused on the pentagram shaped wounds. About 20 alleged cultists in Casper were interviewed. Nothing whatsoever implicated them. Rumors spread falsely that Lisa's heart had been removed. I do specifically remember hearing that as a kid.
I bet that was fun to hear as a kid.
Yeah, and like the whole occult, but this was during the Satanic Panic where
Yeah.
most murders were satanic murders.
Yeah.
I remember that shit all too freaking well. The backward masking of rock music and,
Yeah.
and Dee Snider is before the freaking Congress testifying about the satanic nature of Twisted Sister. And,
Yeah.
all of that shit's going on right about this same time. So the cult theory in Lisa's case emerged due to the unusual pattern of the knife wounds that were found on her chest, specifically 5 arranged in a pentagram shape with a 6th below the sternum. This led FBI agents experienced in ritualistic crime, or claiming to be experienced, because let's face it, there's really not a lot of ritualistic crime. There was a lot of crime that was claimed to be ritualistic that now we know was just bullshit and part of the whole Satanic Panic thing. But yeah, they were experts. So shortly after,
I love your air quotes.
shortly after Fleckinger joined the case full time, he met with 2 FBI agents in Billings who reinforced this cult theory based on the wound patterns. And the agents warned him that, quote, the unusual knife wounds, 5 in a pentagram pattern and a 6th under the sternum, indicate a possible occult connection. And, now looking back, we know that none of that's true. It was absolutely just made up bullshit of this era,
Yeah.
But they spent, him and Dan Tholson with Natrona County spent the next 6 months interviewing about 20 self-identified cult members in the Casper area. And some of these individuals reportedly wore robes with symbols similar to the wound pattern on Lisa's body, and were described as holding meetings outside town near distinctive rock formations on the Wyoming plains. And, I do remember a lot of this shit going on.
Yeah. Even up here.
Yeah. The tunnel that the Heart Mountain Canal flows through.
Mm-hmm.
You would go over there and there would be like pentagrams spray painted on the walls and stuff like that. I mean, this shit was everywhere during the 80s. This is also the era that Ozzy is biting the heads off of bats. And just, having that occult connection. I mean, Motley Crue did it. They had a pentagram in almost all of their stuff. Alice Cooper, Ozzy Osbourne. I mean, it was a way to sell records during this time, and it was a way to rebel against parents. And so, how many of these were actually involved in true occultic activity? It's really hard to say.
Probably a low percentage.
Yeah. How many of these were a bunch of kids that knew that mom and dad didn't want them doing this kind of stuff? So they would go out drinking beers, dressed up like idiots and spray painting pentagrams on shit. That was a lot more of what was actually going on during this period of time. So obviously, these interviews produced no evidence connecting any cult or cultist to Lisa's death. None implicated themselves, and no forensic or circumstantial evidence ever pointed to any occult involvement. So, but the nature of Lisa's murder led to rampant rumors in the community, many centered on the supposed cult angle. One particularly persistent and completely false rumor was that Lisa's heart had been cut out of her body. The story spread widely, generating numerous tips, but was rejected by both investigators and by the autopsy report.
It drew back.
Yeah. Investigators received frequent calls about the cult theory, much of it based on public speculation and not on any direct evidence. So after exhaustive investigation, absolutely no credible link was established between Lisa's murder and any cult or ritualistic group. And lead investigator Dan Tholson would later say that despite the rumors and the wound pattern, the case, quote, was actually a pretty simple, straightforward case, end quote. involving a lone predator, Dale Wayne, the piece of shit eaten, and no cult or no wider conspiracy. So this ill-founded cult theory and its accompanying rumors diverted considerable time and resources away from evidence-based leads in the investigation's early years. It was just an absolute waste of time. Which that brings us to the next lead that would pop up in the case, and that was a drug dealer named Jack. And it matched Lisa's, he supposedly matched Lisa's possessions. So Flickinger found police had leaked this info. Jack's blood and DNA would later clear him, but the drug dealer Jack episode in the Lisa Marie Kimmell investigation illustrates both the complexity of the case and the pitfalls of linked investigative information. So investigators, including the ATF agent Don Flickinger and Natrona County detectives, received tips implicating a local drug dealer known as Jack in Lisa's murder. This was
saying his name like that.
This was partially because Jack was known to be in the Casper, Wyoming area when Lisa disappeared. So when questioned by Flickinger, Jack said that he was in Casper to pick up a stolen snowmobile and described being at a remote cabin where he noticed a suitcase and 2 stuffed animals among someone's possessions. So Jack, his description of these items matched what Lisa was known to have with her on the trip, details that quickly raised investigators' suspicion that Jack might be involved. But after deeper investigation, Flickinger discovered that the details about Lisa's belongings had been leaked beyond the inner circle of law enforcement. So this meant the matching description that Jack provided could have been attained secondhand, not through any direct involvement.
Right.
So it soon became clear that rival drug dealers likely fingered Jack as the suspect to harm his reputation or to eliminate him as competition. Compounding the confusion, Jack, in turn, retaliated by implicating other drug dealers, creating this web of false accusations and wasted investigative resources and time. So despite his plausible sounding story, Jack and several of his associates underwent multiple interviews, polygraph examinations, and finally DNA testing. All were definitively cleared of involvement in Lisa's murder, as none matched the forensic evidence from the crime scene. So this set of leads consumed months and considerable manpower due to the initial convincing overlap of facts, until it was determined that the leads had originated from rumor, from leaks, and criminal rivalries rather than involvement in the crime. But the Jack episode exemplifies how external, non-official leaks and the rumor mill can steer even the most determined investigators on costly detours in high-profile cases. So no evidence has ever connected Jack or anyone in his circle to Lisa Marie Kimmell's murder or abduction. And then we have a Las Vegas man with a CRX. So an unsigned letter pointed to him. He had admired Lisa and deliberately bought a car just like hers after meeting her, which is weird and freaking creepy, by the way.
That is creepy.
But VIN checks and DNA would exclude him. And it was a significant but untimely false lead in this investigation with this weird-ass weirdo in Las Vegas who went out and bought a black Honda CRX as similar to Lisa's as possible and had developed what investigators would describe as an unusual fixation on her. So the Kimmell family received an anonymous, unsigned letter from Las Vegas lamenting Lisa's death. The letter included a return address.
This poor family.
Right. On the envelope, which led investigators to the sender. And the author, who was a Las Vegas man, had met Lisa while she worked at an Arby's restaurant and was reportedly enamored with her, which, let me just say, I've been out shopping, been to restaurants, been all over the place, and I've seen some beautiful women, and never once am I ever been like, I'm in love with this woman. If I'm going to go buy a car just like her, like how freaking weird do you got to be?
It's very weird.
Shit like that.
I'm very glad you're not that weird. Thank you very much.
Insane. I mean, typically when somebody develops a fixation like this on somebody, it's like over the course of time and multiple, not like I ran into a pretty girl at an Arby's and now I must have her. I'm going to go drive a car like hers. And this guy's a freaking lunatic. But
missing some crayons.
Yeah. So he went so far as to purchase a black Honda CRX, the same model, the same year, and with a sunroof absolutely identical to Lisa's after he'd met her.
Please tell me he didn't try to put Lil Miss somewhere.
I don't know. Not that I know of, but it wouldn't surprise me. So these details obviously alarm both Lisa's family and investigators, given the fact that Lisa's distinctive car had played a central role in her abduction, and it was still missing at that time. So Flickinger had the local ATF office and did not match Lisa's missing car. The man's DNA was also compared to the foreign DNA found with Lisa's body. There was no match, excluding him as a suspect in the murder. And although the man admitted to this weird-ass, creepy, freaking infatuation with Lisa and his purchase of a similar vehicle, all being very unsettling, both forensic and document evidence rule him out as being involved in the crime. But let me tell you something.
You tell me.
This guy is probably a rapist or a killer or something, because normal, healthy people do not act that way.
Yeah.
I don't know who this guy is. I could never find his information. But if he's not on a sex offender registry or in prison somewhere, I would be surprised.
Right.
Seriously, this guy's a nut job. So obviously, again, this lead consumed considerable time and attention due to that outward plausibility, a suspect with a personal connection,
travel,
the identical car, the suggestive behavior. So the Las Vegas man's fixation and the letter remain a very curious footnote in this crime, a striking example of the many eccentric, unrelated dirtbag creepos who surfaced during this long investigation, but who played no actual role in Lisa's disappearance or murder.
I think creepo is a new John word.
Is it?
I think so.
We need some t-shirts or something maybe. So like I said, there's no evidence that ever tied this freaking psycho weirdo to the crime, but the case illustrates just how unique and obsessive behaviors can cause significant diversions in major investigations. And then we have a weird one, I guess. Another weird.
I was going to say.
Those aren't weird enough.
Now we have a weird one?
So a man who would become a suspect in Lisa's investigation was a former Casper, Wyoming cab driver who then moved to Texas and became a police officer. He entered the investigation due to disturbing reports about his interactions with women. So we have another creepo we got to talk about. So he had reportedly harassed or made female passengers uncomfortable while driving a cab in Casper, which put him on local law enforcement's radar after Lisa's murder. Witnesses or informants suggested his pattern of behavior might be in line with someone who could commit a violent crime against a young woman. So, again, this poor guy, Flickinger, pursued this lead with seriousness because the officers know in history and the seriousness.
Chasing his tail by now.
Oh, he's running all over the place.
Yeah.
So now he gets on a plane and goes to Houston, Texas to personally question the officer, reflecting the lengths to which he would go to check on any remotely credible leads.
Right.
So the Texas officer, upon learning about the ongoing murder investigation, readily and voluntarily submitted a sample of his blood for DNA comparison. That comparison to the evidence collected from Lisa's body showed no match, fully eliminating him as a suspect. And this line of inquiry demonstrated the methodical nature of the investigation, as agents did not overlook people with troubling histories, even when they were in positions of trust. This episode also contributed to the case's reputation for exhausting a vast number of leads and suspects, but finding no resolution until the emergence of the DNA match in 2002. No evidence has ever linked this Texas police officer or his activities to Lisa Kimmell's murder, and his cooperation with the investigation was complete and definitive. And then we have another strange one. Sheriff Ron Ketchum, a highly controversial lead. A witness placed him pulling over a woman on March 25th, 1988, with dispatch records supporting that he was on duty. Other reports accused him of targeting women on county roads. His 1990 suicide attempt on the anniversary of Lisa's abduction intensified suspicion, and after he left office, he reluctantly provided DNA and then was eliminated. So Sheriff Ron Ketchum became one of the most controversial figures in the Lisa Marie Kimmell investigation, raising speculation due to his conduct, witness reports, and personal struggles, though he would ultimately go on to be exonerated. But a credible witness reported seeing him pull over a young woman in a patrol car on March 25th, 1988, the same night as Lisa's disappearance, and dispatch records confirmed that he was on duty, contradicting his later claim that he wasn't on duty. Additional reports emerged.
So what was he actually doing?
This guy, I get all kinds of creepo vibes from this freaking cop. I'm telling you what. Additional reports emerged accusing Ketchum of stopping women on isolated county roads, fueling growing suspicion that he might have used his authority for predatory purposes. Ketchum, a Natrona County sheriff from 1987 to 1991, was reportedly adamant about keeping control of the investigation, resisting requests by both the Kimmell family and his own detectives to bring in federal help. He allegedly threatened Ron and Sheila Kimmell with arrest for obstruction if they pushed for outside involvement. This created friction, obviously, between local and federal authorities and with Lisa's family. And although Ketchum's detectives supported bringing in additional resources. So following tips and mounting suspicion, federal investigators requested a DNA sample from Ketchum. Initially, he told them to go to hell. He said he would not provide his DNA and was reportedly angry at being treated as a suspect. He delayed for over 4 months, relenting only when threatened with a court order that would make the request public. So he finally provided a sample. Laboratory analysis conclusively excluded him as the source of the DNA found on Lisa's body, clearing him as a suspect. But then in March of 1990, very near to the second anniversary of Lisa's disappearance, Sheriff Ketchum attempted suicide and was treated for depression afterwards. This act, close to the case's anniversary, further fueled speculation about his possible involvement, despite an absolute lack of evidence. And then his later successful suicide in 2000 revived the rumors, but friends and some former colleagues emphasized his history of depression and personal troubles unrelated to Kimmell. So fellow law enforcement and investigators who explored every rumor stated firmly that there was no evidence connecting Ketchum to Lisa's death. He was never a suspect, but every angle required exhaustive investigation. Multiple law enforcement officers, including those closest to the case, have stated the persistent allegations stem from local vendettas and misunderstandings rather than any true evidence. Sheriff Ketchum's involvement exemplifies how rumors, public perception, and the personal behaviors of public officials can escalate investigative complexity, even in the absence of genuine evidence. And, let me say, I couldn't find a lot about this guy, so I really don't know. But this insinuation that he would pull over, attractive women on remote county roads seriously makes me put a big question mark on just how much of a creepo this guy actually was.
Right.
We know that has happened with law enforcement officers forever.
Too much.
That they've done, not all of them, obviously, but select few of creepos that become cops have done stuff like that. So I have no reason to say that he did and no reason to say that he didn't. So, and then in 1994, Lisa's parents brought in psychic sisters, and they provided only vague visions, offering no usable leads. So 6 years after Lisa's murder, and with the investigation long stalled, her parents brought in psychic sisters from Great Falls, Montana, in the hope that unconventional insight might help find Lisa's killer or reveal critical evidence. Investigators led by federal agent Don Flickinger and Natrona County Detective Dan Tholson had explored countless dead ends and were reportedly open to anything that could help at this late stage. So Lisa's parents, exhausted by years of fruitless investigation, genuinely believed that a psychic intervention might uncover hidden answers or guide police towards Lisa's killer. The psychic sisters met law enforcement at Government Bridge, which was the murder site. One psychic walked the crime scene with a glass of water, a technique said to help receive visions, and the other held a crucifix that Lisa's father had given her. The sisters reported receiving images of a rural setting and said the number 2 felt significant. They also had a vague sense of something being buried, but they did not elaborate or offer anything more substantial. So investigators remain skeptical, but willing to listen, given the depth of the cold case at this point. Ultimately, the sisters' information amounted to only vague impressions with no actionable details or verifiable leads. No physical evidence or new witnesses resulted from their involvement, and the session did not advance the investigation. So Dan Tholson later commented that by then, quote, "we were looking at anything we could try," end quote, reflecting the degree of desperation among investigators and Lisa's family. The story of the psychics became emblematic of the lengths to which both investigators and the Kimmell family were willing to go in the face of years of dead ends and frustration, but it also underlined the persistent lack of progress until the eventual DNA breakthrough years later. So no credible lead or evidence ever came from the psychic's consultation, and it stands as one of the many unconventional efforts that were attempted in this long unsolved period of Lisa's case. So, it's just some of the obstacles in this case. Obviously, Flickinger was traveling all over the freaking place, even to Alaska, following these false car sightings. His reputation for collecting massive amounts of blood samples earned him the nickname the Vampire. Turf and political tensions surfaced between federal and local law enforcement, never a good thing in an investigation.
Right.
And that was especially true under Sheriff Ketchum, but collaboration continued on the ground. So by his 1995 retirement, Flickinger's work had exhausted countless theories without results. He later called Lisa Kimmell's case his greatest professional disappointment, though he strongly believed that DNA would someday solve it. So after his retirement, the murder remained dormant for years. The preserved rape kit with the male DNA was essentially the only tangible evidence that investigators could cling to. Leads slowed down to nothing, and the case faded into absolute unsolved status. So for 14 years, the Kimmell family lived without any answers, and the investigation battled frustration with a file full of what ifs and rumors and conflicting stories, all while Lisa's Honda CRX remained missing and sightings unverified. So the DNA delays, the semen samples collected in 88 were not profiled until 2002, and that was due to the emerging technology of RFLP, which limited. So with the RFLP, they needed a much larger sample. They weren't able to actually duplicate the sample at that time. So that left absolutely no match during that time. And then there were criminal oversights as well. The blood on the old government bridge matched Lisa's, but no immediate suspect ties. The river search was incomplete. The car being buried on Eaton's property, but it remained undetected despite multiple area searches. And so her investigation suffered several notable crime scene oversights and missed opportunities, allowing crucial evidence and the perpetrator actions to go undetected for years. So, like I said, investigators found Lisa's blood on the government bridge, and then the blood matched Lisa, which verified it as the likely scene of her stabbing and the point from which her body would have been dumped into the North Platte River. But despite this evidence, investigators could not link any immediate suspects to the crime scene. The bridge's remote, rarely traveled location meant that there were no direct witnesses, there was no surveillance, especially at that time, or physical links that would point to a perpetrator. So while the evidence led police to theorize that the killer was likely local or at least familiar with the area, no further forensic or circumstantial clues from the bridge itself produced a lead for more than a decade. So the initial river search after Lisa's disappearance and the discovery of her body was incomplete. While her body was found in the river, other key items such as her clothing and vehicle were never recovered from the water or from adjoining areas. And important evidence may have very well been missed, as personal belongings and potential clues could have aided in reconstructing Lisa's captivity and murder. The car, as we've said, would be a crucial piece, but it wasn't located for a long time. So the incomplete search contributed to the case remaining cold, as tangible connections to the killer were never found in the vicinity of the bridge. And then, there were jurisdictional issues, multi-state involvement, Colorado, Wyoming, Montana, with coordination challenges between the Natrona County Sheriff's Office, the Wyoming DCI, FBI, delayed a federal takeover. The investigation into Lisa's murder was hampered by persistent jurisdictional issues that arose from the nature of her disappearance in the multi-state landscape. Her disappearance while traveling from Colorado to Montana, being murdered in Wyoming. So we've got all of this shit going on, and so Lisa disappeared in Wyoming after she had left Colorado on her way to Montana. And so you've got to investigate leads from every one of those states. Obviously, did somebody follow her from Colorado? Did somebody come down from Montana? Is it some random person in Wyoming? Who the hell knows? So obviously that required communication between Wyoming, Montana, Colorado. Now we have the ATF and we have the FBI. And so we got all kinds of shit going on, multiple agencies involved in this. And then there has to be this coordination between all of these different agencies. And so it's just a freaking shit show, really. And then we have the fact that Sheriff Ron Ketchum didn't want nothing to do with federal involvement. He was resistant to any outside involvement and was reluctant to form any kind of a multi-agency task force, despite repeated requests from his detectives and from the Kimmell family. So This resistance obviously slowed the integration of outside experts like DCI, the FBI, and delayed the broadening investigative resources. So, pre-modern protocols risked contamination when we're talking about the evidence handling. So the handling of evidence in Lisa's case.
I knew you'd get it.
Thank you. Thanks for that vote.
You're welcome.
Illustrates the limitations and vulnerabilities of pre-modern forensic protocols and investigatory practices, as well as a major delay in leveraging potentially decisive evidence. So at the time of Lisa's murder, formal protocols for evidence collection and preservation were far less advanced than they are today. Gloves, sterile containers, chain of custody logs, and contamination controls were inconsistently enforced nationwide. This wasn't just Wyoming. This was everywhere.
Right.
There was potential for contamination of biological evidence such as blood, hair, fibers, semen, simply due to handling and storage limitations or lapses in clearly documenting every transfer and examination of items. And although DNA samples from Lisa's rape kit were ultimately preserved well enough to enable a CODIS match, the intervening years saw evidence handled by multiple labs and agencies under protocols that would today be considered insufficiently rigorous. The fragmented, multi-jurisdictional nature of the investigation further increased the risk of gaps in custody and physical integrity of evidence, and some materials, such as further clothing, car interior evidence, or other fibers, may have been lost, contaminated, or rendered less reliable by these early practices. So, we've talked about this weird ass freaking letter that then would show up on her grave in October of 98. And what I found odd about that is initially in the investigation, it was treated as potential contact from her killer, but there wasn't extensive investigation of like trying to identify like any of our creepos have handwriting that matches this or anything like that. That would occur after Eaton's arrest, where handwriting expert Jim Braz from the Denver Police Department would analyze and match his samples. But, I do think that this letter could have potentially led to an earlier arrest of this piece of shit. And then early witnesses claim there was a car at the bridge. The timelines conflicted with the autopsy, the dismissed leads like Eaton's prior arrests and being a total freaking whack job creepo that called the sheriff's office and said that he was afraid he was going to hurt somebody. I mean, this is shit that really, he should have been looked at a lot harder, and not just for Lisa's case, for a lot of the shit that was going on in this area during this period of time. We've talked about the fact that multiple witnesses reported seeing Lisa's car with different sweaters, but it's really strange how that shit all went down.
Yeah.
I mean, the likelihood that any of those were actually Lisa is almost none, but it's still just weird how so many of these people were like, no, it was definitely her. It was her car.
Yeah.
Those license plates, like, it's really strange. We've talked about Delwayne Eaton consistently throughout this season of Rocky Mountain Reckoning. He keeps coming up. We know that his criminal record goes way back. I mean, the son of a bitch tried to burn his house down when he was a kid.
Yeah.
He was in like a facility, a youth facility in Colorado when he was a kid. I mean, this shit goes way back. And some of which includes mental health episodes that required psychiatric care when he was still in Colorado. And then in the 90s, he continued displaying violent behavior. We'll talk about it, but in 97, he assaulted and tried to kidnap a married couple with their baby down near Rock Springs. And then he went to prison for that. And then which, again, I don't know, man. I struggle with this because we now have a guy in Wyoming, albeit a ways away in another county. You know, it's quite a distance from Casper to Rock Springs and from Natrona County to Sweetwater County. But you've got a guy that is kidnapping a family on the road. Why not? Why does that not raise some red flags? Why don't we try to get a DNA sample in that period of time, 1997? But that didn't happen. Instead, he went to prison for that offense. Not nearly long enough, by the way.
No.
But he was then paroled, but right after his parole, he was arrested again for a firearm offense, and then that would lead him to federal prison. And in federal prison, again, we'll be talking about a lot of this, but in federal prison in 2001, Eaton killed fellow inmate Carl Palmer, for which he received an additional sentence. And so, but despite his proximity to the crime scene, his property being where Lisa's car would eventually be found, but during this period of time, he's not far from Casper. He's a freaking creepo. We know he's a creepo. Now he's kidnapped a family in Rock Springs, and still he's not. It really seems like this is something that could have potentially solved this case earlier than it solved. But I think we do have to talk about the limited manpower in Casper and Natrona County during this period of time. Their focus on how high-profile tips just kind of overwhelmed them. And the 1990s budget cuts slowed any kind of cold case work. So the Natrona County Sheriff's Office was the lead agency, and it operated with a small staff and finite investigative resources at that time, especially for a homicide of this complexity. The department struggled to balance the high volume of leads that poured in after Lisa's case aired on Unsolved Mysteries, handling over 1,000 tips in the weeks after the murder. And they were just unable to allocate sufficient detective time to the methodical canvassing and the on-the-ground searches. Extensive labor-intensive work such as door-to-door canvassing or full reconstructing Lisa's travel route was often just not at all feasible within the staffing restraints, especially as the national spotlight began to fade. So, the prominence of Lisa's case meant that the office often prioritized the most sensational or outlier tips, such as leads about the cult activity or the reported CRX sightings as far away as Canada, regardless of their actual plausibility. Police
freak job in Vegas.
What's that?
I said in freak job in Vegas.
Exactly. Yep. But I think we'd be remiss to not at least discuss that in the 1990s, broader budget cuts and funding shortfalls hit sheriff's departments across Wyoming hard. Obviously, this included Natrona County. So cold cases like Lisa's, which require specialized forensic testing, travel, and outside consultation, increasingly became low priority as resources were scarce, and so they were reallocated to current emergencies and rising caseloads in other crime categories. So investigators, including federal agent Don Flickinger and the Natrona County Sheriff's Office Detective Dan Tholson, described the frustration of hitting walls in manpower and money, meaning even promising old leads might sit unpursued for months or for years due to lack of funding and staff hours. So obviously, this is going to have a huge impact on the case. And Casper Police Department and Natrona County Sheriff's Office operated on modest budgets compared to the national average for cities of similar size in the 1980s. According to historical public data, Casper typically fielded fewer than 90 officers for the entire city, with a staffing ratio close to or even sometimes below the national median for a similar sized city. Sheriff's office budgets in Natrona County were described in period reports as tight, with funding dependent largely on county tax revenue and vulnerable to any economic downturns, with which Wyoming did experience in the 90s due to a decline in the energy markets. So the 1990s budget cuts at the county and the city levels led to periodic hiring freezes, reductions in overtime, and limitations on equipment purchases, training, and travel for investigations, particularly outside the city or the county limits. The Wyoming State Archive holds law enforcement center financial records for 1980 to 1982 and budget Casper and Natrona County, but detailed scans records from the 1990s had not been published online. So, I basically have to travel to, I think, Cheyenne to look at all this. But the 2023 budget for law enforcement in Natrona County, for reference, was over $18 million for all law and order functions, with about $6.5 million for the sheriff's administration and patrol. And this is a significant increase from the much leaner periods of the late 20th century. So funding shortfalls in the 1990s frequently drew complaints in regional press and were cited by officers and detectives as a key impediment to the cold case work on cases like Lisa's. So, while precise line item records for each year in the 1990s are not digitally accessible, the context is clear. Natrona County law enforcement operated under significant resource constraints, with budgets shrinking during the decade and impacting investigative capacity, especially for major and cold cases. And, I just think that it's really important that we talk about that because it's still going on. Yeah. From what I understand, our current sheriff's office is under a hiring freeze because our county commissioners think that spending money on a shooting range is somehow better than funding our law enforcement officers. And, I am absolutely willing, and I am the first one on board to jump in and criticize law enforcement when they're freaking morons and they do the wrong thing.
No.
But on the other side of the coin, we have to equally back them up when they're not given the resources to do the job. Like, how can we be upset when cases are left unsolved when we're not willing to pay to solve the cases? The fact is, investigations into these cases are expensive, and cold cases take a back seat. And when you're not willing to fund like a cold case unit that can go back and investigate these cases that are left unsolved, the expectation that the sheriff or the police department or whatever agency we're talking about should somehow prioritize those cold cases over the current cases is ludicrous. They cannot do it. So as a society, we have got to decide that this is important and we need to pay the bill for it. That's all there is to it. Now, does it need to be, spent responsibly, and should there accountability be for that? Well, absolutely. But, that's the case with every county, every city, every state, up to the federal government. I don't like where a lot of my money's being spent, and it pisses me off when we're talking about law enforcement agencies that aren't getting enough money, but yet we're funding whatever freaking nonsense that we're funding. So
a lot of nonsense.
There's a lot of nonsense. Lisa wasn't the only one. That's the part people forget, or maybe it's the part they try not to see. In the years before and after 1988, women kept vanishing across the West. from small towns, rest stops, two-lane highways that stretched for miles with nothing but cattle fence and dust. Some were found, most weren't. Different jurisdictions, different names, but the same ache, the same silence that stretched out across Wyoming, Montana, Colorado. Some of these women weren't even reported missing right away. They were written off, labeled runaways. Their stories sank before they even surfaced. And that's where the real fear crept in, because once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. And you start to wonder how many predators were using the same roads, the same rest stops, the same routes that Lisa took. This wasn't just one tragedy. It was part of something bigger, something no one had the tools or the will to name out loud. I don't want to spend too much time talking about this because it is kind of the whole season of Rocky Mountain Reckoning is what we're doing is we're talking about these, but just to kind of run through them, we've got Janelle Johnson, which she's had her own episode. We talked about her. She disappeared. And then she was found in Shoshone, Wyoming. Again, not at all far from Dale Wayne Eaton's property. We have Lisa Marie Kimmell, who we're talking about now. We have Irene Vasquez, who was unidentified and known only as Bitter Creek Betty for many years. We know now who likely very well killed her. Clark Perry Baldwin, who just freaking keeled over, which I'm not that sad about, but I do wish he would have faced justice for this.
Yeah.
Tanya Teskey, who will have her own episode, but she disappeared after leaving Shoshone, Wyoming. She lived in Shoshone. She was last seen in Billings, and her body was found in Idaho on August the 15th of 97. Then, there were multiple other cases, some of which we'll discuss, some of which won't fit into this season, but we've got the Sweetwater County Jane Doe, the Sheridan County Jane Doe, who has now been identified. And then we have high rates of violence against Indigenous women in the rural West through the 80s and 90s up till today.
Yeah.
Montana reported 41 missing and murdered Indigenous women cases in 2018. Wyoming had a disproportionate number of Indigenous missing persons, with a 2021 report noted 710 missing. That's 31% Indigenous, despite only being 3% of the entire population.
Right.
So of the entire population of Wyoming, only 3% is Indigenous people, but yet they make up 31% of the missing, which is insane.
Yeah. That's like, there are no words. I only have noises now.
I know, and it's like that, honestly, in pretty much every state where there's a reservation present. It's not unique to Wyoming, Montana. It's not even unique to the United States, because you're seeing the same thing with the First Peoples nations in Canada. So this is a problem, and it will be the focus of next season of Rocky Mountain Reckoning, where we'll be talking about a lot of these. But, just to run through a few of them, Nylene K. Marshall, who was age 4, which is a child case, but it fits the missing pattern. She disappeared June 25th, 1983 in the Elkhorn Mountains near Helena during a family picnic. Patricia Burnett Meehan, who was 37, disappeared April 20th, 1989, following a car accident on a Montana highway, Montana Highway 200 near Circle, Montana. Sheila Pearl Lewis, who was an Indigenous woman that was 33 and was discovered August the 3rd, 1980 near Parker Dam in Washington, which was, obviously it's near Montana, Idaho. And she had massive internal injuries, so possibly maybe a hit and run or a murder. But then, we got to discuss some of the non-Indigenous missing. Amy Robechtel, who would definitely, she'll have her own episode or maybe more than one episode this season because she fits. And I think that she is very likely another victim of Dale Wayne Eaton. And when we get to her episode, I can go into detail as to why. But, then we have Vicki Lynn Perkins. She would go missing in 89 in Utah, and she'll have an episode, but she really fits in this pattern of missings. We talked about Naomi Kidder. I mean, the list just goes on and on and on. I mean, I just sit here all damn day talking about all
Right.
of these different missing women, but it's obvious that we had a major issue going on in this area during this period of time.
Yeah.
And it's just absolutely absurd. And to think, and I've said it a million times, I hate to just repeat myself, but the fact that none of us knew this was happening during the time it was happening, it's just
I keep thinking back, did I hear anything? No. Didn't hear anything.
Amy Robeco, that was everywhere.
Yeah.
Heard a lot about that case. Lisa Marie Kimmell, everywhere. Heard a lot about that case. Janelle Johnson, I never heard that name.
No.
Naomi Kidder, never heard that name.
No.
Sharon Bald Eagle, never heard that. I mean, Belinda May Grantham, never. I could just go on and on and on. Fox Park Jane Doe, nope, never heard of that one. Sheridan County Jane Doe, Vasquez, Bitter Creek, but never heard any of these. It's really crazy and alarming, and I don't know, it's just bizarre.
And aggravating.
It is aggravating for sure. I mean, it's a travesty. And I don't know what the solution is, but the fact that one murder out of, I don't know, I'm just pulling numbers out of my ass here, but one murder out of 500 becomes like a big national case.
Yeah.
The other 499, nobody ever.
I'm sorry, you don't matter as much.
Nobody ever hears about them. Once in a great while, one of them will make it on one of the millions of freaking true crime shows and podcasts that are out there.
Mm-hmm.
But no matter how many of us there are, no matter how many podcasters there are out there, no matter how many true crime documentaries, the fact is the vast majority of murder victims never have their story told.
They're forgotten.
We can do this for the rest of our lives. We can do multiple episodes every freaking day, 365 days a year, and we wouldn't even begin to scratch the surface.
I know.
I mean, it's
disgusting.
It's insane is what it is. It's just unbelievable. Time didn't bring clarity. It didn't bring comfort. It brought more questions, more names on the news, more missing faces in the paper, and still no answers. Lisa's family never gave up. They called every tip line, showed up at every meeting, kept her photo on the mantle, kept her name in the open air. But hope, after a while, starts to feel like a weight, because carrying it means carrying the not knowing. Who did this? Why her? Where did he go? And how has he lived with what he did? These were questions that haunted her mother, that sat with her siblings, that followed investigators home at night, and that echoed through every unanswered call. The silence wasn't just cold, it was cruel. Because someone out there knew exactly what happened, and they said nothing. Lisa's case wasn't closed, but for the moment, it was quiet. Too quiet. And in that quiet, the killer still had a name, and they just didn't know what it was. Not yet. She had this habit of writing notes, little reminders to herself, to her mom, to coworkers, a sticky note on the fridge, a scrap of paper tucked in her car visor. Don't forget lunch. Love you. See you soon. Be safe. They were small things, ordinary things, but they came from a person who didn't take time for granted. Lisa made people feel remembered, even in the middle of an ordinary day. And it wasn't just the words, it was the way she showed up, the way she cared, the way she made people believe things could get better because she was already doing her part to make them better. She didn't move through life waiting for things to happen. She made them happen. Working full-time, dreaming, saving up for the next step. Lisa had plans, but more than that, she had momentum and someone stole it. They didn't just take her life. They interrupted a future still being written, a story that deserved more pages. Lisa mattered, not because of what was done to her, but because of who she was and who she would have become. The years after Lisa's murder were marked by two things: grief and waiting. Waiting for a lead, a break, a name. And for far too long, those things never came.
But Lisa's family never let the silence win. They kept her story alive. They spoke her name when others forgot. And that persistence, eventually it paid off.
Next time, we'll take you to the moment that the case shifted. The moment that the DNA finally matched a name.
If this episode meant something to you, help us keep Lisa's story alive. Like, follow, leave a review, and give us a thumbs up wherever you're listening. And most importantly, share this story. Someone out there may remember something.
You can support the show and help us keep doing this work by joining us on Patreon or by making a donation on Ko-fi. Every dollar goes straight into research, field work, and production.
Subscribe to our newsletter on Substack. There you'll find bonus content, case files, full transcripts, and deeper investigative material from the Dark Dialogue Collective.
And for real-time conversation and community, join us on Discord. It's a space for listeners who care about the victims, about justice, and about each other.
You can also reach us directly at info@darkdialogue.com. We listen, we respond, and we value every message.
This has been Dark Dialogue, Rocky Mountain Reckoning. I'm John.
And I'm Angela.
We'll see you next time when the shadows start to move. Until then, make the guilty face the reckoning.